In the fall of 2014, Memorial University School of Social Work current third-year students completed 2 community service learning projects. For our projects, we completed documentaries. The first class completed a documentary on trans narratives, and the second class completed a documentary on missing and murdered Indigenous women. In the fall of 2015, the current second-year students completed a community service learning project. Throughout their term, they tried to connect in partnership with community groups so that they could fulfill the community service learning requirements. Unfortunately, they were unable to obtain a partnership, so in the end, they created alternate works such as pamphlets and brochures. In the following videos, we will discuss how we are still reflecting and learning from our community service learning experience and how it has impacted our current work as social work students and how we think it may impact our future work as social work practitioners.
So we just finished the fall semester with Dolores, and we did the CSL and the SCL, and that was our first time ever having that experience. I know, like, even before we entered the class, there was hesitation that, oh my goodness, we don't want to be in Dolores' class, we know it's going to be difficult, people may fail. Like, we had this whole idea of what it was going to be about and what it was going to be like. Did you guys have any, like, of that experience, or?
I was afraid because, like, I seen the Rate My Prof, which is a website that students are allowed to rate their professors, and Dolores had good reviews and bad reviews, so I was a little bit nervous. But in the end, when I attended the class, I felt a sort of understanding in the topics and Dolores' point of view. Because I am a minority, I'm an Aboriginal woman, and it just made, I felt like I made a bigger connection with her.
Yeah, I found that, like, throughout the course, the power really was obvious. Dolores handed a lot of power over to us as a teaching method to show us that we did have the power in the situation, and a lot of people were scared of that, I think, and they either ran with it and led the class by themselves, or they kind of hid under. And that came out really when we were struggling to complete a CSL project with the community because a lot of people were uncertain. And then what happened basically was that we didn't complete one in a certain way that we had the idea of completing one, so we called it a fail. So Dolores had to take back some of the power, and a lot of us resisted. And that was a really big teaching moment, because in social work, in those situations, when you are practicing, it does come out that, you know, we hand over the power, but sometimes we need to take those back for safety reasons or whatever those reasons may be. And in that moment, it was a huge learning lesson for a lot of people in our class to realize that. So I think that was a really important point for us.
For sure. When I was introduced to the class, the student-centered learning, at first I was clueless. I didn't feel as though I was prepared. I didn't know what we were going to do, what I was going to do with this power that was handed. We're so used to just going to class, listening to the professor, taking their power and, you know, kind of doing our own thing with the guidance of them, and not being able to guide ourselves to you know, the knowledge that we're supposed to learn from it. And I, from experience, like, I've always, you know, I'm used to that kind of teaching method. And so when I was given power, coming from a shy personality, I didn't want to take the stance at first. I was frightened to do so. But throughout the course, I discovered that, you know, that was the only way that I was going to get, like, the, you know, the best possible learning experience from this course. So, like you said, you know, people took initiative with the power. I wasn't one at first, but throughout the course and towards the end of the course, I found that I had taken a stance, I had taken leadership roles, and I was really surprised with myself because, you know, I discovered a piece of my personality that never existed. So now, going on forth, like, I feel like I'm able to take stances and self-advocate for myself, and that's really important as well, because if I can't self-advocate, how am I going to advocate for my clients in future practice?
I had the opposite, I guess, from you. I have such an assertive personality that I immediately took leadership when Dolores handed me the power. She did have to take the power from me, not to give back to herself, but to give to the other students, because I wasn't giving anybody else a chance to facilitate, to be a leader. So I learned how to step back, and I learned how to sometimes listen and not have to express my opinion all the time. So it was a learning experience for me as well.
Right.
Yeah, so there's different level of confidence, I guess, that comes from that and growing and learning.
For sure.
It was a messy process, and some people really struggled with it, but I know for me in the end, I learned a lot and I grew, and I have this certain amount of confidence, and I feel empowered to go forward and do things that maybe I wouldn't have had before. So I think it was 100% beneficial.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a very strong commitment to student-centered learning and community service learning as well. And I'm committed to student-centered learning because I think the idea of sharing power with social work students is important. It's a way of modeling good social work practice, and it also allows me more of an opportunity to do transformative work in the classroom that I normally would not have if I did not share power. So I see sharing power as something that's positive, not taking away, but actually adding to my own power.
I personally felt that the power sharing in the classroom was a little bit uncomfortable at first, because we're taught all the way up through our education to sit down and listen to a teacher or professor at the front of the classroom that's going to stand there and lecture you, and you're going to go home and study those notes, complete a test, and leave the classroom. So it was a bit of discomfort having to take a leadership role in the classroom when I wasn't expecting to have to do so.
Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it was interesting to see how members of the class took initiative and kind of owned that leadership and that power that was there for them to take. And I thought it was great to see in my class who really stepped up to take on those roles, and how those people really filled the void and then even added to the learning, because it's much better to learn from 5 and 6 people. You're going to get much more perspective than if you're just listening to one instructor through a whole semester.
I completely agree. I also feel like our community service learning project allowed us to learn not just from our classmates, but also people in the community. I think it's important to note that through our CSL project and our coursework, I've learned that helping is often approached in a way that silences the voices of those that we're supposed to be in partnership with, by creating a power imbalance that doesn't allow community and population's voice to be heard. And I think that by working with instead of for people in the community in CSL, that we're able to learn from them and use their expertise in a way that is helpful for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And as the facilitator, because I already call myself a facilitator instead of a teacher, and sometimes an educator. And as the facilitator of a student-centered learning classroom, when people are trying to do their community service learning projects, it's tricky for me. It's tricky, and as I've said, painful as well, because students really, from my experience, don't really want to be in that particular place. They're not comfortable. They're scared, afraid of failing, not used to the normal, what they believe to be the normal ways of being in a classroom. And so, there's usually a lot of questions around what kind of teacher am I anyway, and how much the class is disorganized, and just angst and a lot of anxiety around what exactly are they learning.
And the trick is to try and move past that and still create your own learning, because for some students, they simply, in the short semester, they can't move past the anxiety and the hostility that comes out of being left on your own, as some students feel they were left on their own. But what I thought was interesting in our term project was that I don't think we learned to really work in partnership with the community at all. I think that in reflection, after the project was completed, we realized that while we were attempting that throughout the entire semester, we never really achieved it. And we really had some pitfalls that we fell into and never really moved past them. But there's been great learning since then, even a year down the road, through reflection and through discussions about the project, and thinking, you know, we really did try and work in partnership, but maybe if we had done it this way, we would have achieved it.
I also think that's where the most growth happens, is when you sit with your discomfort, as Dolores always told us throughout the semester, and learn from it instead of just sitting there and doing absolutely nothing. I think that we both have similar views on the importance of CSL and student-centered learning in social work education, Emily, although we had different experiences with our respective CSL projects. With the trans narrative documentary, we had a really healthy partnership, I think, with the members of the transgender community that were involved in the documentary. And our documentary allowed them to choose the parts of their lives that they wanted to share and the messages that they wanted to relay, which is, again, the working with instead of for that is at the core of CSL, and also involving people in a way that lets them be the expert of their own lives. There's no reason to talk for people when they can talk for themselves, personally believe.
And you know, in our documentary, with what we tried to work with a certain Indigenous group, and you know, they didn't want to partner with us, but we continued with the project anyways, and that was a mistake we made back in September. But we were so focused on that project that we didn't even consider the fact that we should start again and find a different population. And by moving forward with that, I think we're now realizing as a group how we were complicit in white dominance, and you know, really the power that we took from that group by continuing to tell their story, which was unfortunate that, you know, we didn't recognize it back when we did. But I mean, now reflecting on it with classmates, everybody seems to be in agreement about that, and that's a really powerful lesson to learn in your third year of social work.
I feel a lot of times people get into a career in social work because they want to help people, and this notion of helping, like I previously mentioned, can sometimes overpower the community partnerships that you're trying to create. And I think that's the point where we have to step back and reflect and ask, are we really even helping at all? Which I think your class did at the end of it. And I would argue that no, it's not helpful, and that we're really losing those core values of social work and why we're here, like why we were here to begin with. So I think it's really important to take those reflections, especially that you guys learned.
Yeah. And for me, as the facilitator of the course, what was most interesting was how angry students were when the group did not want to work with them. And so we did a lot of discussions and reflections around why this group might be annoyed with us. And we talked about the kinds of pressures that this group actually experienced from being, you know, it's very politically sexy to work with Indigenous groups. And, you know, it's like we put a feather in our cap and we feel as if we've accomplished something because we've worked with an Indigenous group. So we really, as a class, you know, I had to help students to reflect and to tease out, you know, what was happening around their own racism and how colonialism was being reproduced in that very classroom, in those very moments when students were trying to bridge the divide between this group and social work students, keeping in mind some of our history as social workers with Indigenous peoples. So that was interesting. Quite painful, actually, to watch students. Some people came to terms with some of the challenges that I threw out, and some people didn't seem to come to terms, and that's okay because that is a part of the learning. The learning doesn't happen. In student-centered learning, and you know, in this case, the community service learning, the learning doesn't happen in the moment all the time or on the spot or immediately. It happens through reflection, and I think that's the important piece. So I think really student-centered learning and coupled with community service learning is really important in social work education. It positions social work students to be 21st century global contributors in the work with marginalized communities, and particularly those with complex concerns coming from all parts of the globe. It also positions social work educators as being on the front lines of transformative education. And I think, again, it's a model for how social work students can actually practice when they get out in the social work field.